NITV wishes to advise that this program may contain images and voices of people who have passed.
Hello and welcome to Living Black. I'm Karla Grant. I'm in Canberra to talk with one of the most impressive advocates for First Nations people, namely Pat Turner AM. Auntie Pat had a long and illustrious career in the Federal Public Service. These days she runs NACCHO, the National Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation. And if that's not enough, she's the lead convener of the Coalition of Peaks, which is working with all governments to try and close the gap.
We know that over many years our people have lost faith in the Closing the Gap policy. It wasn't delivering the changes needed, and year after year failure was reported. What has been achieved over since 2008 with just everyone focusing on the targets? What has really been achieved? Nothing. Now's the time for the rubber to hit the road and for all governments to invest the money at the community level.
Auntie Pat Turner, welcome to Living Black.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Well, there may be some in our audience who don't know what the Coalition of Peaks is. Can you explain what it is and what it's meant to achieve?
Sure. Well, it's the Coalition of Peak Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations. And we came together in 2018. 6 of us got a meeting with the Prime Minister, who was then Scott Morrison, and he could see the sense of what we were saying, and it was passed by the COAG. So the Coalition of Peak soon became 40, and now we're some 80 peak organisations at both the national level and at the state level. That's who the Coalition of Peaks are. We're the peak organisation, so while we are some 80 at the peak level, we represent over 800 organisations that are on the ground delivering practical services to our people.
Now, the other big hat you wear is as Chief Executive of the National Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation, otherwise known as NACCHO. You've said that 500,000 people access 550 locations across the country. That's a massive undertaking, but do those clinics struggle to meet the need?
Well, they do struggle because we're all underfunded. We're not funded on an equitable basis. There's about a $5 billion shortfall in funding for Aboriginal health when you compare the health funding that goes to other Australians. So we've worked since I arrived in NACCHO in 2016 to get a needs-based funding model. But, with a $5 billion shortfall, you can see immediately that our services do the best they can with the range of resources that they have.
Now, Auntie Pat, let's talk about your remarkable life. You grew up in Alice Springs in Bartwa in the 1950s and 60s. What was it like then?
Well, it was a very small town. I think the population was about 4,000 when I was growing up. My first memories, I guess, are we lived down the gap in the cottages where all the urban Aboriginal people lived. So we were all in a big cluster mainly. So we'd have lots of fun after school and playing together. I went to kindergarten really early because my brother was going, so I felt that I should too. And then we started primary school, so we used to ride our bikes to school. And I always loved school and did very well at school.
And as a young adult, you went back to Alice as the first Indigenous welfare officer in the 1970s. I imagine that would have been a very challenging time. What are your memories of that time?
Well, first of all, I did a lot of work with juveniles, and because I trained in South Australia, and they had a system whereby any community worker representing the juveniles' interest in the courtroom would provide the court with a social background report on the child. And so I did that. I introduced that into the Alice Springs Magistrates Court. And so when I had a child coming up, I would work with the Aboriginal Legal Service so that I was able to go out to that child's community and talk to their families and the persons responsible for them and consult with them about what was the best way to make this child understand that their behaviour wasn't acceptable. I started a program whereby, with the school and the parents agreeing, I'd take 11 high school students who I felt were at risk of getting in trouble with the law to court. And they would sit in the jury box and the clerk of courts would come and address them, explain everything that would happen in the court that morning. And then I'd take them back to school at lunchtime and drop them off.
Now, these days, Alice Springs is characterised in the mainstream media and by Peter Dutton as a city of fear where crime is rampant. Is that fair in your view?
No, it's not fair. We do know that there are issues with youth crime, and we do know that people who are directly impacted, it's very traumatic, and that's really sad. And the businesses have suffered as a result of stupidity and, car theft and break and enter and breaking, glass windows, and it's idiotic in my view. And I think parents have to be held more responsible. I think that there needs to be a place where kids can be taken to sleep safely and have a meal, because quite often they're hungry and they're out looking for something to eat. So I think there can be a lot more done, but the negative impacts are that it's very hard then to attract professional staff to work in our services, like our health services. Both the media and the Conservatives who like to, talk it up, need to be more responsible, in my view.
Did you have a sense during the election campaign that Indigenous people were really engaged after all the national cost of living pressures that affect First Nations people worst of all?
Well, First Nations people are always engaged because they struggle every day of their lives. Cost of living isn't new. The struggle to meet the day-to-day expenses are not new to Aboriginal people. So we've had to have, new policies like food security in remote areas introduced and to try and make a real difference. The biggest need in Aboriginal affairs and Torres Strait Islander affairs is housing. And no government has tackled housing for Aboriginal communities in the way that it should. There's been a very generous contribution by Labor to the Northern Territory, and all the Northern Territory government ever wants from the Commonwealth is the money and to do what they like. And their policies, the Northern Territory's policies for Aboriginal people, are so retrograde, especially when it comes to justice, adult incarceration and youth incarceration. And, they're breaching all the human rights of our people without a care in the world, and it's absolutely appalling.
The National Agreement on Closing the Gap was signed by governments and the Coalition of Peaks in 2020.
It aims to fundamentally change the way governments work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
What Closing the Gap shows us is that there are so many incredible issues that need to be tackled.
Yeah.
We've just had 3 years of a Labor government which promised to improve the lives of First Nations people. Where has the Labor government failed?
After the referendum, there was a real lull. We know the reasons for that. After the referendum on the voice failed. When Mullindiri McCarthy became the minister, she re-energised the efforts in relation to the national agreement and fulfilling their responsibilities. So that was really welcomed by us. But what we haven't seen is the big commitment from the Commonwealth to lead the way. For example, I think that the Commonwealth can legislate standards for the treatment of juveniles in this country to meet our international obligations, and they should, because the only jurisdiction that has 14, I think, as the criminal age of responsibility is the ACT. Every other jurisdiction is 10. Every other jurisdiction is 10. And people seem to forget that. They think, oh, it's just Northern Territory and Queensland as thing, but the other states are exactly the same. So if the Commonwealth doesn't legislate, there's no pressure for the states to reform in that way. And we can't have our kids keep on getting locked up and removed from, taken into out-of-home care. It's just fragmenting our communities and breaking down our culture, and it's just another run of the stolen generations.
We will be a government that supports reconciliation with First Nations people, because we will be a stronger nation when we close the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians.
The Labor Party have just been re-elected. As the head of the Coalition of Peaks, what are you expecting to see from a second-term Albanese government?
Well, I expect a greater commitment in relation to the revenue and for the Commonwealth to take the leadership and entice the match funding from the jurisdictions as a kick-off, and then make sure that there's an understanding that the ongoing programs need to be delivered in a timely manner. Housing's one example. Education, we've done very well under Jason Clare, and so we're very pleased about that, and states and territories should be extremely happy with the deal that they're getting. Our health services, community-controlled health service, punch way above their weight, as we demonstrated during COVID. But I want the Labor government to commit the financial resources. I don't want them to fund the Northern Territory government or the Queensland government without conditions tied that are in the best interest of our people, and in a shared decision-making partnership with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander representatives in those jurisdictions. The same should apply right across the country, of course, because we have Coalition of Peaks at the state and territory level, and each jurisdiction has to work with them. We also have the Local Government Association, and they've come good in terms of, we've had some very good local government representation of Aboriginal people, and they're starting to, pick up their game in terms of what they need to do. So I expect a lot stronger leadership from the second term of a Labor government when it comes to the National Agreement on Closing the Gap.
Let's talk about the Closing the Gap targets. Not many are regarded as being on track to meet targets by 2031. So what are the main positives?
Well, we've seen an increase in healthy birth weights. We've seen the enrolment of Aboriginal kids in preschool. I want to know more about attendance rather than enrolment. And there were a couple of others that, we're on track, but the big issues are certainly not. Juvenile justice is going backwards. Adult incarceration is going backwards. Housing is going backwards. I don't really like the targets because I think it's too easy for the media to focus on that when what the Coalition of Peaks wanted is the structural change within government in terms of the way they work with our communities at the regional level and local level and state level and national level in shared decision-making partnerships, and to transform their own institutions so that they're safe places for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to interact with and respectful of our culture. So, get rid of the racism, get rid of the systemic poor treatment of our people, And that's the sole responsibility of government.
Now, as you've mentioned, there are many categories which are described as improving but not on track. For example, despite better school attendance rates, the intellectual development of children starting school isn't improving.
No.
Why is that?
Well, early childhood development has long been neglected in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. SNACE has really ramped that up, and we in NACCHO have also paid a lot of attention to early childhood in terms of their healthy and neurological development. So we start working, before the baby's born with new mums or mums who are having, multiple children. We have a program that takes them through to nurses working with health workers and new mum from before the birth to 2 years old. And then we have ongoing, follow-up checks with all the immunisations. I'm a bit worried about immunisation at the moment because it's falling off, and it's absolutely essential that our under fives are fully vaccinated, and everyone must get the flu vaccination because it's just so important,
Also incredibly worrying are the high suicide rates of our young
Yes.
people. What can be done to tackle this crisis?
NACCHO is heavily involved in this space in terms of suicide prevention, and we've expanded our suicide prevention services across the board. ARCHOs are engaging much more readily and upfront to prevent the level of suicide. So we have prevention measures. We have 37 sites that are working consistently on suicide awareness and prevention and first aid and telephone support. We obviously would like to stop suicide full stop. It's a scourge on our society, and we can't afford to lose the lives that we're losing through suicide. So we definitely have to fight for additional resources and the right personnel and have our people trained to handle, the very significant trauma that comes from working with people who attempt to take their lives.
Young people are still heavily overrepresented in the criminal justice system, as we know.
It's appalling.
And yet Conservative governments seem bent on locking more people up. One of the slogans in Queensland is adult crime, adult time.
Yeah.
And the Northern Territory government is lowering the age of criminal responsibility from 12 to 10. What do you think will be the effect of those policies?
Many more traumatised youth as a result of the experience of that, really feeling isolated. And the Northern Territory is moving everything to Darwin. So no detention in Alice Springs. People thousands of miles away, especially young people, from their families, no visits. No one can afford to go to Darwin. They're overflowing. The facilities are overflowing. They're so full. And the government really needs to be pulled up about this. And I think the only way to do it is for the Commonwealth to legislate about the way the states are handling our juveniles across the country.
The overrepresentation of our children in out-of-home care remains alarmingly high.
Yeah.
Target 12 of the National Agreement on Closing the Gap is to reduce the rate of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids, and that's a long way off from being met. What are the solutions to this continuing issue?
Doing what they're doing in Victoria, which is transferring kinship care placements away from government-run programs to Aboriginal community control. So the Victorian Aboriginal Childcare Centre Association is now responsible for kinship care with our kids, and they are placing hundreds of children in kinship care compared to, tens of placements that were done by the Victorian government. All of the white NGOs have come out in support of the model in Victoria, and said that they should be introduced nationally, and I absolutely agree with that.
You've said that housing is the number one priority for our people. What needs to be done to tackle this crisis?
Well, governments shy away from the cost. But, you know, the longer they leave it, the more issues arrive. So there needs to be a better design of sustainable housing that will suit the different environments. And I think it has to become easier to add modules to housing and stop the intergenerational living in one house. Young adults have got to have their own accommodation, and so do elders, you know, connected but separate. And, you know, all children and women need to be safe. So where's the expenditure on crim-safe screens? Where's the expenditure on proper locks? Where's the expenditure on having all of the safety issues taken care of? It's not happening. And if it doesn't happen, we're going to have people living in squalor in 100 years' time, continuing. And that is a disgrace for a modern country like Australia, a young country in terms of colonisation. And, you know, they've got to pay the rent. They stole our land and they really have to pay for it. And sooner the better.
Labor committed to a $4 billion 10-year plan with the Northern Territory government for remote housing. Is that going to be enough?
No. It's just a drop in the ocean. And it's got to happen right across the country, not just in the Northern Territory. And the conditions on the Northern Territory funding have to be a lot stronger to make sure they deliver in partnership with the Aboriginal representatives in the peaks in the Northern Territory.
On the issue of education, you've expressed the view that the TAFE system, as it's run by some states and territories, is not as effective as Indigenous registered training organisations. What are the reasons for this?
You know, I think that they're good on the enrolment, but not at the completion. So they have a 32% completion rate, whereas the Aboriginal community-controlled registered training organisations have a 70+%. So we believe that we should have a far greater role in providing the training because we deliver better outcomes. Mickey knew that for us to move forward as a more reconciled and modern nation, the stories of our past needed to be told.
You said in your Mickey Diwa oration in May of 2022 that a treaty is about settling the account of the past, ensuring the telling of the Aboriginal perspective and developing a shared story for the future. We are seeing some progress on moves towards treaty, particularly in Victoria. But do you think there's going to be progress on a national treaty?
No.
Why is that?
All political parties are just too frightened. After the Voice referendum went down, no one wants to touch those big issues.
Sometimes to move forward we have to look back. The dispossession and oppression of our people may have occurred in previous generations, but we are still living with the consequences.
I think truth-telling is the most important thing to do. To again follow in Victoria's footsteps, like with the Uruk Commission, and I think out of that truth-telling will come a much better reconciliation of people at local levels across the country, and understanding their stories much better, and then we could also have, you know, campaigns on government, the way the system works, civic education. And then our people can start negotiating a treaty. That's the way I would go.
Well, Auntie Pat, you've spent more than 50 years working incredibly hard to advance the health and welfare of First Nations people and really trying to close that gap. Are you optimistic about the future?
Well, I have to be, really. You know, if I'm not, I might just pack up and go home. But I want to keep fighting. I fought all my life for justice and human rights and self-determination of our people, and I don't intend to give up now. So, yeah.
Well, Auntie Pat, thank you so much for your time and thank you for everything that you do for our community. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
And that was Auntie Pat Turner, lead convener of the Coalition of Peaks. If you'd like to see this interview again, log on to SBS On Demand. On behalf of the team, thanks for joining us. I'm Karla Grant. See you next time.